recording?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to do a demo using ballpoint pens because I know not everyone has charcoal at home, so we're just going to make do with what we have. But ballpoint pens are awesome. They're really cheap. They're really easy to find, and you can make cool drawings with them. So, yeah, here we go. Okay, we're just going to start off with some test lines here just so you can get to know how the pen feels on the paper. Start off with just exploring the different line weights you can get. If you push really hard, you're going to get a nice dark, thicker line. And as you release off of the paper, you can get it much lighter. So explore all the different variation in line weight you can get. Same's going to go for hatching. I recommend making a full value scale on your page before you start drawing. Start out with just super dark as a pen is going to go, and then start making your steps getting lighter. And as you get lighter, you can lighten the pressure of the pen, but you can also think about the hatching lines themselves. You can actually kind of spread out the different lines, and that'll kind of show more paper underneath it. You'll get lighter in value. So I'm going to make a full value spectrum here. I'll go back down in value again, just to kind of get to know how the pen's feeling on the paper. All these ballpoint pens are a little bit different with how the ink's coming out and how it's reacting to whatever paper you're using. So just kind of take your time with this and see how it all feels. Once we start turning form, you're going to want to be able to get a full value spectrum, especially with softer transitions for form shadows. Alright, so we're starting off with construction lines here. Remember, starting your drawing with straight lines is going to be a lot easier than trying to translate the curves that you're seeing, especially on something as complex as a skull. It's easier to just use your straight lines to kind of lay everything out. Just take your time. Remember, you're going from general to specific, and you're staying super light, going from light to dark. Obviously, we don't have an eraser with a ballpoint pen. That's okay. You just want to keep your lines as light as possible for as long as possible. That's why it's a little hard to see my drawing right now. I'm drawing as light as I possibly can. I'm using my straight construction lines, just kind of mapping out the shapes that I'm seeing. I'm not really worried about light or dark just yet. I just want to make sure everything's going in the right place. It's also important to just stay in orbit around your drawing. Don't get too sucked in to any certain areas, focusing on details or anything like that. It's general to specific. I know it's repetitive, but I'm just going to say that over and over. Keep moving around your drawing, keep correcting. Don't get stuck in one spot. I don't know what my pinky is doing there. Keep your pinky up to stay fancy, I guess. So I'm still moving around my drawing, still kind of correcting everything I'm doing. My lines are getting a little bit darker, a little bit heavier, but they're still, you can kind of see from my value scale, they're still nowhere near as dark as they could get. Just trying to stay super light before I start mapping out shadows. I'm not holding my pen up at the front of it like I would be if I was writing my name on a piece of paper. I do the same thing with pencils and paintbrushes. You want to hold it towards the back of the pen, back of the paintbrush, whatever it is, just because it'll help you stay kind of zoomed out and seeing the big picture. It's good to try and remain at least an arm's length away, at least for this beginning part of the drawing. The closer your face gets to the paper, the more sucked into some detailed area you're going to be, and you might draw a really nice set of teeth, but when you zoom out, when you back up, the proportions are going to be all weird. And you want to avoid that. Keep stepping back. That's why I also prefer to work standing up, so it's easier to step back and see everything. When you're sitting down, it can be a little bit easier to forget. So I'm starting to map out some shadow shapes here, trying to be aware of the edges. When you're mapping out your shadow shapes, the edges are going to describe all the forms. So remember, a cast shadow is going to have a harder edge. A form shadow is going to have a softer edge. So I'm going to start mapping out my shadow shapes. I'm going to stay right around here on my value scale. Kind of a darker mid-tone, but not quite my darkest dark. I'm going to go in and just start filling in my shadow shapes. Most of these hatching lines are just straight up and down. They're just vertical, just because I'm kind of going for a flat shape. Remember, when we're mapping in our shadow shapes, it's just going to be a 2-value statement. There's going to be 1 value for shadows and 1 value for your lights. This can be easy to rush, but it's important to stay consistent in how you're filling in these shadow shapes. Especially with a ballpoint pen, it can get a little repetitive with all these lines, but the more consistent it is, the less distracting it's going to be once it's all in there, and that's the goal. You want a solid shadow shape. It's at this point in the drawing too that you can really start to choose what's going to be in there and what's not. What I mean by that is you can really start designing which pieces of information you're going to be putting in and what you're going to leave out. A well-designed absence of information can be just as important as adding any kind of details. So now I'm kind of looking at some of the softer form shadows, going for a lighter value, kind of more in the middle of that value scale on the left. Spreading out my hatching marks a little bit. I'm going way lighter with my pen pressure, just to kind of develop some form on the top of the skull and some of the lighter areas, the lighter shape. So I'm still just trying to stay in orbit around my drawing. I don't want to get too sucked into any areas, but I am going to start picking out a couple harder edges. Remember, those cast shadows are going to have the harder transitions from light to dark. I'm not going to fill in all of them. I'm just kind of picking and choosing where I want them to go. That bridge of the nose area is super important. That light shape on top of the nose and the eye socket. But I'm not going in and copying every single detail that I see. So again, I'm kind of picking out a couple lines here and there, trying to add a little bit more weight to where the jaw is meeting the ground plane it's sitting on. Even though I'm not really including any of the environment in this drawing, I still kind of want it to be grounded. The light source is up above the skull, so I'm keeping all those values really light, and I want to kind of push those darks on the bottom edge of the drawing. Now I'm just kind of pushing that shadow shape a little bit darker, a little bit further down on the value scale. The teeth are a good example of not really pulling out every single detail that I'm seeing. I'm kind of just picking and choosing what I want to put in there. There's some cool little gaps up near the gum line and between the teeth of like negative space that I'm outlining, but I'm not going in there and drawing every single tooth. So I'm starting to angle some of the hatching that I'm doing to kind of break up those vertical lines I was doing when I initially filled in the shadow shapes. I'm really just trying to finish up the drawing. I'm kind of picking and choosing which edges I want to stand out and have the most contrast. But if you look in the shadow shape, there's really not a lot of information in there. I'm kind of choosing what not to put in there, if that makes sense. So just as we're nearing the end, remember one of the hardest parts of a drawing is knowing when to stop, knowing what not to include. It can be really good to just kind of walk away at a certain point that you're satisfied. Even if you're not sure if it's done, just let it sit for a day. I kind of like where this one was at. So it's kind of maybe time to stop. Which is a skill in itself, learning to walk away from a drawing. So that's it. Don't overthink it. Don't underthink it either. Stay hydrated. Remember to stretch. Wear your sunscreen. And wash your hands too. Okay, bye. I'll see you next time. Later. Do you want to go watch TV? We're done? Let's go. Let's go.